Well, today I'm really excited about this webinar in particular. I love shooting portraits, I love editing portraits, so this should be a really good and fun webinar. Today we're going to be modifying some creative portraits, and I'll just show you some of my favorite ways to pull out and develop some creative style. And at the end, I'll upload these practice files, and then if you want, you can edit the photos while you rewatch the webinar. So we can get started here with this creative portrait editing webinar. And I just have a few creative shots here, and we'll just go through, and from start to finish, we'll just develop a bunch of cool, creative looking shots. So we'll start with this photo here, and I'll just head into the edit module once it loads here. Okay, so for this particular photo, whenever I'm shooting a portrait, especially if I'm shooting a portrait vertically, which more often than not you're going to shoot a portrait vertically, I would crop it. Probably you're going to have a little excess in the frame if you're shooting a portrait. So as you can see down here in this bottom area, we have a little bit too much of this paper, and then there's a little bit of this excess up top here that we could probably get rid of with just a nice crop. So we'll crop this photo first to start out. I'm just going to hit C on my keyboard. And yeah, we could probably use a 4x5 preset. Let's see how this works if I just pull it up here. And that works about perfect. We kind of remove a lot of that excess down there, and then we have this intersection of rule of thirds, and it's almost directly on our eye. So pretty good with the crop. I think so far we can just hit enter. And now we have a crop shot. Looks a little bit better like that. And I was playing with this photo earlier, and whenever I'm modifying a portrait, especially if it's a little bit underexposed, as you can see this portrait's, a tad underexposed. Well, if I'm shooting in RAW, which more often than not I'm shooting in RAW, especially if I'm shooting portraits, I can head over to my tone and color, and I'll go down to my camera profile, and I'll go to ON1 Portrait. So now if I hit the backslash key on my keyboard, just by clicking that different camera profile, it's really brought out a lot of those different tones in this shot. So that's just literally by picking a different camera profile. I honestly haven't modified any of the other things in tone and color, just this camera profile. And I think that's probably all I want to do inside the tone and color pane. I think it looks pretty good as a base for our shot. So the next thing I want to do is I have these pieces of paper in here, and they're really awesome in the shot. I mean, they add a ton to the photo. They're really cool foreground element, but they're a little bit bright, and I think I want to focus on her as the subject and kind of just tone down the areas around her. Well, a great way to do that is to use a local adjustment. So we're going to use some different local adjustments here, and we're just going to go in and kind of dilute this area with the fire and the paper. So we'll head into our local adjustments tab here, and I'm just going to use the preset darken, which it's already applied to if you add a new local adjustment. And I'm going to rename this one right side because I'm going to be doing two of them. So I just want to make sure that I have them organized. So I'll just rename that one right side. And I'm actually going to go down here and I'm going to pull back on the blacks as well, just a little bit. Perfect. And so now, because I want to deal with this right area of this paper here, I probably don't want to brush this on. I think a better way to apply this would be to use an adjustable gradient. So to grab my adjustable gradient, I'm going to hold down Shift and I'm going to hit K on my keyboard. And that's going to grab me my adjustable gradient. And my preset up here is set to linear top, which is exactly what I want. I want the mask applied to the bottom area. So I'm just going to drop this down, and I'm just going to rotate it a little bit so that it lines up with that piece of paper here. So now if I head over to this local adjustment and I turn this off and on, it just does a good job of kind of pulling out some of those tones, just kind of diluting that area so that it's not such a strong foreground element in my shot. So I think that's good for this particular side. So let's add a new adjustment, and I'll rename this one left side. And same thing, just click darken. I don't need to click darken. It's just kind of fun to just turn that on every once in a while. And I'm just going to go down and I'll pull back on my blacks a little bit, like I did with the other one. And same thing, we'll just drop this down, we'll rotate it, probably just about right there. Actually, I'll pull this up a little bit more. Cool. And for this left side, what I'm wanting to do is I have this local adjustment area over here, and it's stopping at her face, but if I move this over, you'll see that there's this area on the side of her face where there's not a whole lot of light hitting it. Well, I can accentuate that by just pulling out this local adjustment and just bringing it a little bit over here, and then I can move it and it will put just a hair of that on her face. So now if I turn this off and on, if I zoom in here and I turn this off and on, just a hair of darkness just to kind of clean up that lit area right there. Perfect. So now we have the left side and the right side of our photo kind of figured out. We don't have this foreground element so strong in our shot anymore. We can start dealing with our subject. Actually, let's go in and let's actually pull out the colors in the shot a little bit more. There's some awesome colors in this flame here, and let's actually just do that real quick. So I'm going to go into Effects, and I'm going to add a filter, and I've been doing this technique a lot lately, but I just love the look you get with it. And so in my tone curve here, what I've been doing is I go down to my shadow tones here, and I pull down on them just a hair, just to add in some contrast, some nice kind of shadowy contrast to my photo. And then I'll go up to my midtones and my highlights, and I'll just pull those up a little bit. And I can kind of play with it to make it, less contrasty or more contrasty. And what I'm looking for here is I'm trying to pull in some nice contrasty, almost mood-like color into these flames and in this paper. And if I turn this off and on, it's doing a pretty good job, but there's still quite a bit of contrast in here. So what I'm going to do is if I only want this applied to the color area in the flame here and in this paper, I'm just going to go over to my tone curve, and I'm going to click this gear button, and this is going to pull up my blending options. Well, a cool blending mode, if you only want a specific filter or adjustment applied to your color tones and not the actual tonality of your shot, is you can go down to the blending mode and you can just click color. So now if I turn this off and on, if I look in these flames here, and in the paper down here, it's just adding in a nice little bit of robust kind of dark rich color, which I'm really liking. But if I look in here with my subject, she's incredibly orange, and I definitely don't want all of that applied to our subject. So we're going to grab our masking brush by hitting B on our keyboard. I'm just going to make it quite a bit bigger. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to brush this out from our model here. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to bring out the tonality in our face right here. It's a little bit kind of faded into the background, and it's not really popping out of the frame. So let's go ahead and let's pull out some of these midtones just in her face and really accentuate our subject. So I'm going to go over and I'm going to add a filter, and I'm going to add another curves filter. And if you've watched any of my previous webinars, you know I'm a huge fan of the tone curve. I'm sorry, it's just one of my favorite filters, and it really allows you to just develop a lot of specific tones in your image. So for this particular shot, I'm just going to zoom in to her face. And what I want to do is I just want to pull up on some of the midtones and then add in some contrast. So I'm just going to go into my midtone area on my tone curve, which is this middle area, click, and I'll just pull up, and that'll bring out some of those midtones and really kind of make our subject pop right here. Well, I'm also going to go down, and then this area down on the bottom here, I can make and add in contrast really easily by modifying this black point here. So even though I've pulled up on my midtones right here, I pulled up on them quite a bit, I can still go back in and add a little bit of contrast without pulling down on the shadow detail by just pulling right on my black point. So watch as I pull to the right here, just ever so subtly, it'll add in contrast to my photo. So I'm just going to really lightly just maybe there. And so if I zoom out now, her face looks a lot better with that filter being applied to it. Well, I don't want it applied to the entire thing because that'll kind of remove the purpose of what we did earlier by bringing these areas down with a darkening local adjustment. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to that curves filter that we applied earlier. I'm going to go into the masking options. I'm going to copy this mask. And then I'm going to go back to my other curves filter. We can actually rename this curve face curve. And I'll just paste that mask, and then I'll invert it. So now, if I turn this off and on, it's only being applied to her face right here, and it really works for just making her stand out in the photo. So now what I want to do is I just want to do a few more things to this shot just to kind of tone it up and really just finish it off. So the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to go in and kind of fix some of the tonality in her eyes. So we're going to go into our local adjustments tab, and this is one of my favorite ways to just fix a little bit of an underexposed eye. Is just add a new adjustment. I'll rename it eyes. Oops, probably not dyes. Eyes. And then I'll use my preset styles here, and I'm just going to select Magic Eye Fixer. And the Magic Eye Fixer is a great little preset style. It pulls up on the exposure, adds some structure, and it removes some of the haze. So if you apply it to an eye, it really brings out all of the tonalities in there. And it's really strong, so just be careful with it. I would definitely recommend pulling back on the opacity after you apply it. So let's zoom in here, and we'll brush this on to her eyes. Perfect. So now if I go back, I'm going to go to my eyes local adjustment, and I'm just going to lower the opacity to 0. And then what I like to do is just incrementally just kind of pull up on it. And I think that looks about perfect right there. One thing I could do is I could go down and I could cool down the temperature a little bit so that they're not so warm and they are a little bit more separated from her face. Cool. So let's hit the backslash key on our keyboard to see how we're doing here. And we're on the right track. There's just a couple more things I want to do to just creatively finish this shot. And the next thing I want to do is I'm going to go into effects, and I'm going to add a filter. And one of my favorite filters, especially for shots like this, is a vignette. And I like using this big softy preset. My bad. Okay, so we'll move on. And the last thing I want to do this photo, and it's just to add a nice kind of stylistic look, because this is a creatively editing portrait webinar, we're going to add a filter, and we'll add a textures filter here. And we're going to go in and we're going to add this nice light leak right here. But I don't like what it looks like on her face right here. So I can always go back into my masking options for that texture, and I already have that mask copied from before, so I can just go down and I can paste that mask and watch. Now that light leak is only being applied to the area around my subject, and it's not being applied to her at all. So if I hit the backslash key on my keyboard, really done a pretty good job of just kind of pulling out the tonalities in our subject, kind of diluting the foreground element in here, and then just adding in a kind of stylistic light leak just to finish it off creatively. Sweet. So okay, cool. So I have this photo here, and one thing I want to do first, and we did it with the last one, but it's to crop it. With these vertical portrait shots, there's going to be a lot of kind of excess area on the top and on the bottom, especially if you're shooting a profile photo. So we kind of have this profile photo of our model here, and we have a little bit of excess in this bottom, and we have a little excess in this top. So we'll hit C on our keyboard. It's going to grab our crop tool, and I know I typically work with a 4x5 preset for probably most portraits, but I just love how 4x5 looks. It does exactly what I'm trying to do and just kind of removes, the excess from the top and the bottom. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold down Shift, and I'm just going to pull in on this just a hair, and then I'll just move it over a little bit, and then I think that's pretty good. So I'll just hit Enter here, There we go. And now we have a lot better of a cropped photo. Also, oh, we got some dust spots right here. So I'm gonna remove this dust spot. And actually these, I think these are birds maybe in the shot, or they could be dust spots as well. But we're just gonna remove these with our retouch tools. I'm just gonna go in with my perfect eraser, and I'll click on these, and we can remove some of these dust spots. Okay, sorry about that. I probably should have cleaned that up before, but okay, so for this particular photo, I was playing with it earlier, and same kind of thing. It was a little bit underexposed, and so what I did is I went over to my tone and color because I knew it's a raw shot, and I just went down and I chose that ON1 portrait preset style. So now if I hit the backslash key on my keyboard, it's already doing a good job of just kind of setting that base foundational look, just kind of steering me in the right direction. So now I know that inside my tone and color pane, there's only a few sliders that I need to really pull out the tonality. And I think those are just my midtones and my shadows, and then I can add in a little bit of black for some contrast. So watch as I go down, I can pull up on my midtones, I can pull up on my shadow tones a little bit, and now I'll just go down and I'll add in a little bit of true black. I'm gonna hold down my J key, and I'm just gonna add in a little bit of true black into my shot. About right, maybe -3. We'll do -3, but just for some nice contrast. So now if we hit the backslash key on our keyboard, it looks pretty good as far as the foundational look goes, and now we can go in and we can start adding that creative style to the shot. So the first thing I want to do is I want to fix the color in this photo. And rather than fixing the color inside my tone and color, I'm actually going to do it inside of effects. And I'm going to add a filter, and I'm going to use a photo filter. And this is one thing that I like to do with portraits, just because it gives me some different options that I can use to apply it to different tones on my photo. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a minute. But I'm just going to go into this photo filter here, and I'm just going to go into the preset styles, and I'm going to choose orange. And already you can see that that's making a nice impact on the shot. It really adds in some nice warmth to this photo, which is kind of what we're missing with this shot. So let's go in, and I'm actually going to go down, and I'm going to choose a different mode, and I'm going to choose clean highlights. So now if I turn this off and on, it's really bringing in kind of this light, airy, warm summer vibe to this photo, strictly by using this photo filter to do it. And the cool thing about this photo filter is that you can actually go in and modify a lot of the color for that filter. You can modify the saturation, the amount, how much is applied, the hue, and you can go down, and if you're having trouble pulling out some contrast, you can go down into your polarizer option for this photo filter and watch as I pull it to the right. It adds in a nice little bit of contrast because it's trying to emulate a polarizer filter. So the photo filter, just an option if you're looking to clean up some color or kind of apply color selectively. Really great filter to use for that. Okay, so now that we have kind of the foundational look and the color in the shot, let's bring out some of the tonalities and stylize. So I'm going to add a filter, and I know you guys know which one I'm going to add, and that's a tone curve because I want to pull out some of the midtones. So I'm just going to go into my tone curve here, and I'm just going to go pull out some of these midtones, kind of bring some life back into the shot. And what I also want to do is I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to see about adding in a little bit more contrast as well. I typically, if I pull up on my midtone point, I like to just go down and kind of keep my contrast in check as well. I don't have to stick with that look, but it's always good to go down and just see if I do want to add in any contrast. Which I think a little bit of contrast could do some good. Let's leave it how it is, and I'm going to add in contrast by just going to my shadow tones right here, and I'll just click in the middle of them, and I'll add in contrast that way. Probably about right there. Perfect. Okay, so I really like how this works on the bottom half of the shot. But if I turn this off and on, there's still a lot of life left in that sky that we're really kind of removing by pulling up on the midtones. So a good way to fix that is just to hit M on your keyboard. That's going to grab your masking bug. So this is the best way if you have an area on the bottom or top of your photo where you just want that filter applied and you don't want it applied anywhere else. Just hit M on your keyboard. It'll grab your masking bug. It'll save you a ton of time. And now you can just drop this down and you'll see it's only being applied to that bottom area. And now we still have all of that nice detail in our sky. And with this masking bug, you can always go in and make it a little bit more blended. I can pull up on this and I can feather it a little bit. I can even twist it a little bit so it's not so heavy on her. But I think if we turn this off and on, I think that works pretty good. I think that does a good job of kind of toning down the sky area while leaving this bottom area nice and elevated. Okay, so now that I'm looking at this photo, I really like what that warm tone does, but I don't like how warm it's making the shadows. Well, a great way to actually modify the specific tonalities in your shadows is to go in and we'll add a filter, and we're going to add a split tone filter. And what I like to use whenever I'm modifying a photo where I want it warm, but I want to cool down the shadows, is I'll go over to this nice warm preset style here. And with this warm preset style, it's going to have this mode as normal, which when you're adding split toning, if you use this normal mode, it's going to give you sort of a faded matte look, almost like a vintage photo look. But if you want it strictly just applied to the color and you don't want that faded look, you can go into your mode here, and if I click color, it'll just strictly be applied to the color. So now watch as I turn this off and on. It just adds in that nice little bit of robust shadowy blue, and it just kind of brings in just a little bit more of that creative style to the shot, leaving it a little less airy and maybe a little bit more moody, which I'm kind of looking for with this photo. So the next thing I want to do with this photo is I want to bring out some of the bright tones in the shot. Obviously we have a sun peeking through this area, but what we've done here is we've kind of made this photo a little bit flat by using some different local adjustments and things like that. So what we can do to bring back that kind of highlighted tone in our shot is we can use a sunshine filter. So with shots like this where I have sun in my shot, or I want to kind of emulate a sunshine look, it's always good to add a filter and just try the sunshine filter. More often than not, it does an awesome job by just bringing in some nice tones. But for this particular photo, I'm going to use this strong preset style. And if I turn this off and on, it does a good job of pulling in a lot of those kind of highlighted brighter tones and then toning down the other areas and adding in contrast. But I don't really like what that's doing to my sky here, and I kind of only wanted to apply it to these brighter areas in my photo. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into this sunshine filter here, and I want to brighten this filter up a little bit. So I'm going to go into my blending modes, and one of the blending modes that always brightens up your filter or your photo is the lighten mode. So if I choose lighten here, and I turn this off and on, see how it does an awesome job of kind of brightening up these areas in here? And I mean, it brightens up this area in the sky here, but we can always go back and brush that out. But what I'm looking for here is if I kind of aim at this area in here with this white sheet here, by turning this off and on, it really brings back that light kind of hitting that sheet, and it makes it look like a lot more natural looking shot after we've edited it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back to that tone curve. I'll just copy this mask, and I'll go into my sunshine, and then I'll just paste it. So now if I turn this off and on, we have this nice kind of sunbeam coming through with the trees here. We also have it applied to the white sheet, but we also have a little bit of that sky detail left just to show that we're having some nice clouds on that day. So let's hit the backslash key on our keyboard to see how we're doing here. Quite a transformation. But I like how this looks, and I think the next thing I want to do is I just want to remove some of this orange from her skin here. She's looking pretty warm, so let's add another filter, and just to finish it off, we'll add a color enhancer, and I'll just remove some of that saturation, probably about right there, and then I'll invert this, and then we can just brush this on. Oops, probably want opacity at 100. So if I turn this off and on, does a good job of just kind of removing some of that orange tinge, making it look a little bit more natural. So if we hit the backslash key on our keyboard, just pretty good job of just pulling out some of the tonalities in our foreground here while maximizing the outlook of our sky area. Okay, so I love this photo and I really love the use of the lighting in this shot. So we're gonna do something a little bit different with this shot, and I'm pretty excited for it. But to start out, like we did with the last two, is we're probably gonna need to crop this photo in some way or another. So I'm just looking at the shot, and I think the best way to crop this would be just to remove this top area from our photo. So I'm just gonna hit C on my keyboard, gonna grab my crop tool again, and we can just pull this down, and I'm gonna hold down Shift. I'm gonna grab in one of these corners here, and I'm gonna leave it like this. And what I'm going to do is I'm gonna pull up, and one thing I like to do with portrait cropping is this top line here, this top third line, is always a great line to just kind of set right on the subject's eyes. So if you have this nice little line right here, setting this kind of rule of thirds line right on your eyes of your subject, watch as I hit enter, and it just looks, nice. It just makes it look like a nice, interesting photograph, and that's just kind of an easy tip whenever you're cropping. So cool, now we have a nicely cropped photo here, and we can start modifying it. So with this particular photo, I think what I want to do is I just want to play with the light in the shot, and I don't really want to worry about these other tones. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to head over to my tone and color pane here, and I'm going to pull back on the exposure to about -1. Just like that. And the reason I'm doing that is because I really just want to focus the viewer's attention on these lines of light here, and I don't really want the other areas to kind of overpower that. So we'll just start with that. And now what I want to do is I'm just going to go in and boost the contrast just a hair, just to add in a little bit of nice contrast to this photo. And then I can go in and I'll just pull up on the shadows, or not the shadows, the midtones just a hair, just to kind of even everything out. So now if I hit the backslash key on my keyboard, we've just kind of toned down the photo a little bit. We haven't done really a whole lot to the shot. If anything, we could probably remove that midtone boost. So yeah, we'll just leave it right at that. I think that looks pretty good right about there. What I want to do now is I'm just going to correct for color, and I'm actually going to do it inside my tone and color, but I'm just going to pull back on the temperature just a little bit. Maybe even like 18. Perfect. So I think that looks a lot better, and we brought in a little bit more of that cool sort of temperature to the shot. So the next thing I want to do to stylistically sort of modify this photo is I want to bring in a little bit of mood. And my favorite way to bring in mood is with a tone curve. I know I keep adding them, but they're just an awesome way to add in a lot of style. So I'm going to go into effects, I'm going to add a filter, and we're going to add another curves filter. And to add in a nice bit of kind of moody style to your photo is go down to this left area, which is your blacks on your tone curve. You can grab this point, and if you pull it up, directly up, and then to the right, you'll see it'll add in sort of that nice faded matte look onto your photo. So if I turn this off and on here, we have that cool sort of moody style, and it was all just because we pulled up on this black point in our photo. Cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to add in a little bit more contrast to this photo by pulling down on these shadow tones here. Boom. And I think if I turn this off and on, perfect. I think that looks about perfect for what we're trying to accomplish with the moodiness of the shot. Okay, so now that we have kind of this mood going here, let's pull out some of the life in the shot. And we're going to do that by using some local adjustments. So let's go and I'll add a local adjustment layer. And for this local adjustment, I want to bring out some of the light just in her hair and in her face here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the preset style Lighten. And I'm just going to brush this on her hair and on her face. Oops. Okay, so what I want to do is I'm going to brush this on her hair and face, but what I forgot to do, oops, is I don't want to brush it over her hair at all because you'll see a little bit of a halo. So just gonna keep it in check here. And also one thing I don't want to do is I don't want to brush on the lines in her face, on the bright lines in her face. I want to keep those as kind of tame as possible. I'm also kind of doing the same thing with her hair. I'm just kind of avoiding the bright lines because I don't want to make them any brighter. Cool. So now I'll just brush this on, these kind of lines on her face here. Not too crazy, just, you know, to get the gist. Cool. So now let's head over, and I usually just turn this off and on. But I think this is an awesome job of just kind of pulling out some of the tones and bringing our subject to life a little bit more. And I can always go back to my opacity, and I'll just lower that a little bit. Boom, I think that looks pretty good just like that. So now what we can do is, I really need to fix this eye in here. So I know it looks like it's correctly exposed, but if you zoom in here, her eye is pretty blown out. You can't really see too much detail in there. So we're gonna do the same thing we did with our first photo, and we're gonna add an adjustment. And I'm just gonna rename this one again, eyes. And I'm gonna go to my magic eye fixer again. And I'm gonna pull back on the temperature to cool it down. And same thing, we'll just lower our brush size, and I can just brush this on. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to our exposure, and we're gonna lower it to remove the exposure from her eye. So now if I turn this off and on here, it looks like it's a lot better shape and it doesn't look so blown out. So now if I zoom out here and I turn this off and on, see how much better that looks just by pulling down on the exposure and adding in some of that blue? It looks like it's a lot less overexposed, and it looks like it's a more natural photograph. So let's see what we're doing so far here. We're doing a pretty good job. You know, we got our mood going around here, and then we've kind of fixed her eye a little bit. So now what I want to do is I just want to pull out kind of this just general area. And the way I like to do this is I like to use a local adjustment to create sort of an anti-vignette. So I'm going to add an adjustment, and I'll just name this one face. And I'm going to click darken. And I'm just going to use my adjustable gradient here. I'm going to hold down shift and hit K on my keyboard. And to do this, I'm going to head up to my shape menu. Oops. I'm going to choose a different shape, and I'm going to choose edges. And I'm just going to drop this down here. Oops, we don't want edges, we want center. Okay, so I'm at center. And now I'm just going to pull this down as tight as I possibly can in here, probably about right there. And then what I like to do is I'll just pull it out, and it kind of feathers the entire thing really well. And now watch as I turn this local adjustment off and on. Just such a nice kind of gradual, really feathered vignette, just really kind of bringing the subject to life right there. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I'm actually going to use this same mask right here. I'm going to copy this mask for this face because we already have a mask for her face already, so we can start adding different filters with that same mask. And the last filter I want to add to just finish this photo off is I'm going to add a filter, and I'm going to add sunshine. And if I'm actually going to make it strong again, and I'm going to pull back on the warmth so that's not so warm on my shot. If I turn this off and on, awesome job of bringing in sort of a sunshine look. But I don't want it applied to the entire photo, I only want it applied in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our sunshine masking options. I'm going to paste that mask, and I'm going to invert it. And now watch as I turn this off and on. Does a good job of just kind of reestablishing all of those tones in her face, and then making it look like it was the original photo, all while kind of bringing in this nice, moody, faded look, and then we have this kind of local adjustment vignette. Okay, so again, we have a nice vertical portrait here, which we're probably going to crop in a second. So for this particular crop, I think all we need to do is remove this top part, because this bottom area has these nice lines that I think if we crop it tightly in here, we can get some of these leading lines into the frame. So I'm just gonna hit C on my keyboard. It's gonna grab my crop tool, and I'm just gonna pull this down. And again, one thing I'm going to do is I'm also kind of trying to position this rule of thirds line where my subject is. Now I don't know if I need it right directly on her eyes, but it's always good to just keep these rule of thirds intersections kind of around where you want your subject to be. It makes it for a lot more interesting photograph. So I think that looks good, probably maybe right there. I think that looks pretty good like that. Cool. So I think that looks pretty good as far as the crop goes. So now what we can start doing is we can actually just start modifying the tonality. So I'm just gonna go into my develop tab here, and because this photo was shot in RAW, I'm gonna change the camera profile. But this time I'm gonna go down and I'm gonna change the camera profile to ON1 Landscape. And ON1 Landscape is sort of a almost a contrasty camera profile. It adds in quite a bit of contrast and almost a mid-tone boost, it seems like. So if I hit the /K on my keyboard, you can see it kind of boosts the highlights and midtones a little bit and then adds in some contrast. And it really looks great, particularly on this photo. And so I'm probably just gonna leave that camera profile as it is. And I sort of have my foundational look set now. And so all I need to do is I can go down to my tone and color, and let's just brighten this up a little bit. So I'm just gonna pull up on the exposure a little bit. That'll brighten up some of those tones. And then I can pull up on my midtones maybe, and then we'll add in a little bit more shadow tones. Perfect. So now I've hit the /K on my keyboard. We've just set sort of the foundational look for the photo. And with this shot, what I want to do to this photo is I want to turn it into a nice sort of almost antique-y vintage black and white. Because it's kind of taken on this old school, really vintage bust, she's got an old school cherry cola shirt on, some old school Nikes. This would look awesome in a black and white. So let's go into effects here. I'm going to add a filter, and we're just going to add a black and white filter. And one thing I like to do whenever I'm adding a black and white filter, or more often than not when I'm adding a black and white filter, is I really like this red preset style. And I'll click this red preset style, and you can see it just adds in some nice contrast and tones to the photo. Well, if I go down into this conversion area, I don't want my channel mixer. The reason I don't want my channel mixer is because that means I'm gonna base these tonalities off this one single, basically it's a hue slider right here. I want color response. And the reason I want color response is so that I can modify these different color tones to either brighten or darken the areas on my photograph. So if I turn this black and white filter off, you'll see I have a bunch of red, a bunch of sort of yellows, and not many of it, maybe some oranges, but not many of anything else. So let's turn this back on, and now watch as I can play with my red, and I can either add contrast or I can brighten up some of those areas. Well, for this particular shot, I'm gonna add in a little bit of contrast. But with my yellows, I'm gonna pull up on them and bring in a little bit more brightness to those yellows so that I have sort of a high key sort of look with this photo. Perfect. I really like what that's doing so far. So now let's go in, and there's a few different areas that a lot of people don't know about inside this black and white filter. So we have tone down here, which will allow us to modify the actual tonality. So if I want to add in a little bit more brightness, I can add in more brightness. I have my contrast, basically all of the things that you have inside your tone and color, it's just applied with this black and white filter. We also have toner down here, which is one of these awesome tools that a lot of people don't use. And one of my favorite preset toner styles is this Coffee 1. Just adds in that sort of nice brown and white coffee look, just great. I think it looks stunning on this particular photograph. And one thing that I like to do whenever I'm adding in a split toner to a black and white, especially if there's some nice black and white tones, is click this preserve black and whites. And that will remove some of that toner from your actual blacks and your whites. So now if I turn this off and on, it does an awesome job of bringing in that black and white and preserving the actual whites and the blacks in my photo. So we're on the right track. I think we're just a few more adjustments away to really bring out the creative look in this shot. Okay, so I like how the black and white's looking. We've set the foundational look. One thing I do want to do is I want to tone down these seats. I know they're really great for this kind of leading line into our subject here, but they're really powerful and we don't need them this strong. So an easy way, super easy way to fix this, if you have a shot like this where you have your subject in the middle and you need to tone down either side, well, we'll go into our local adjustments tab. We have a new local adjustment layer here. I'm going to hold down Shift and hit K on my keyboard. That's going to grab my local adjustment gradient. Well, now because I want this applied to the left and to the right, and I want to keep our subject clean in the middle, we're going to go up to our shape and we're going to choose reflected gradient. So now I can drop this down and I'll just rotate it. And then I can move these handles in to kind of meet our subject here. And now if I turn this off and on, oops. Come on, turn off. There we go. But you can see, just awesome job of really just toning down these areas in the seats and really focusing the attention on our subject right here. And now that I'm looking at this photo, I'm gonna go back into my black and white filter, and I'm actually gonna go down here into my film grain area, and let's make it look a little bit more classic. So I'm gonna go to my film grain, and I'm gonna choose a really sort of high ISO film grain, this 3200 T-Max. And I'm going to pull up on the amount quite a bit, just to bring in some nice film grain. And then I'm going to add a little bit of size. Perfect. I think that looks really good just like that. Yeah, so now we have this nice kind of film grain. It actually looks like it was taken with a film camera. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to bring out some of this light in our subject here. She's getting hit with some light from these windows here. And now that we've toned down this area to the left, or to the right and the left in these seats, we can really accentuate our subject here in a few different ways. And one of my favorite ways to do that is I can either use a local adjustment or my tone curve. So I'm going to use a tone curve, and I'm just going to add a curves filter, and I'm just going to do a mid-tone boost, just like that. Perfect. Well, I only want this applied to this middle area here. So we're going to do the same thing that we did earlier. We're going to hold down Shift and hit K on my keyboard. Oops, I don't want Shift and K. I'm going to grab M on my keyboard. That's going to grab my masking bug. So now I have my masking bug selected. I'm going to go up to my shape, and I'm going to choose edges here. I'm just going to drop this down, and I'm just going to pull this in as tight as I can get it again, sort of right around our subject, and then just pull out to feather it. So watch as I turn this off and on. Just a nice little mid-tone boost, just right into our subject right there. Okay, so there's one last filter I want to apply to this shot, and I really like what this does to black and white photos. And so we're going to add a filter, and we're just going to add a glow shot here, or a glow filter here. And I'm going to use this preset style, darken. So watch as I turn this off and on. Does an awesome job of really kind of glowing and bringing in sort of a moody aesthetic to the shot, but it's kind of pulling out some of the sharpness of our subject here. So what I can do is I can just hit B on my keyboard and just one kind of stroke down the middle. Perfect. Now if we just turn this off and on, looks pretty good. So if we hit the backslash key on our keyboard, just an easy way to kind of incorporate a nice sort of stylistic vintage black and white look just by using some different filters and local adjustments. Okay, so that's probably all I have for you guys today. Really appreciate you guys joining up. Stay tuned, we're gonna have more webinars every week. So keep following along. Thanks for being a part of ON1, and have a great rest of your week.